Kick and chase by Mullen. Kick and chase again by Mullen. This will be a miracle. Oh, it is a miracle.
So we have a brand new episode of Hot Tub Rugby League Time Machine, and my guest tonight, he's not only a Panthers tragic from way back, he's also the former editor of Inside Sport magazine, and he's a fantastic bloke. And even through this old seagull, a couple of breadcrumbs, and gave me a few jobs on the magazine before he finished up at the mag. He's a great fella, James Smith. Good evening to you, mate. Nice to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Curtis. Nice to be joining you in the hot tub, mate. As weird as that sounds.
I know. There's not much room once I'm already in there, but I want to ask you a couple of questions straight off the bat. First one is, who's your favourite Panther from 91? And you kind of just answered this for me off air, but you're originally from down Mossvale way. So the first question is, who's your favourite Panther from 91? And how did you become a Panthers fan?
Favourite Panther is really a really obvious one, like Brad Fittler. I just worshipped Brad Fittler when I was a kid, for all the obvious reasons, and he was young as well. He was a couple of years older than me, and when you're young, you tend to sort of really get behind people who are a few years older than you. So would have been Freddie, and I'm actually from Penrith.
Okay. Yep.
I was born in Penrith, and when I was 14, Mum and Dad moved the family down to a place called Exeter near Mossvale, in the Southern Highlands, and so we kind of got ripped away from Penrith, but it was all strategic because, believe it or not, as big as Penrith is now, even back in the early 90s, it was starting to get a little bit out of control. So Mum and Dad went, no, that's it for us. We're going to where it's a lot more quiet, where us kids can have a quiet upbringing.
Yeah, I don't think the riff has changed too much, mate, and that's coming from a bloke that lives at Campbelltown. So
yeah, there you go. And to answer your second part, I became a Panthers fan. I used to support Parramatta. All through the mid '80s, and
that was because of your pop. Your pop.
What's that?
Was that because of your pop? I remember you telling that story.
Oh, not really. No, I was just sucked in by Ray Price. I loved him when I was a real little kid, like when I was about 9 or 10, and I loved him. And one day, Mum and Dad wanted me to go to, because Dad's a retired TAFE teacher, and he used to work at Mount Druitt TAFE as a vehicle trades, panel beating teacher. And Mum and Dad one night wanted me to go to this presentation night at Dad's work at Mount Druitt TAFE, and I still remember how I felt about it. I was like, I'm not really interested in this sort of stuff. I don't like cars. I'm not really, as a 10-year-old, you're not really interested in what your dad does for work. Yeah. And anyway, sure enough, rounded the corner to go into the auditorium, and there was the great man Ray Price there to present students with their awards. And it was a terrific night, that one. But I started supporting Penrith after they lost the 1990 grand final. I was just devastated for the area, and I've said this on another podcast, but I don't mind sharing it with you as well. My mother, who hates football, hates it, just doesn't want a bar of it.
Really?
She was absolutely devastated.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that, I was only a teenager at the time, but you could really feel the pain in the area, like after that 1990 grand final loss, and that did something to me. I thought, oh, this is a team for me now. There's a little bit more of a connection here than just supporting a team. It's where I was from, so I just stuck with it ever since.
And that's the thing too, that as we go along, as rugby league or the NRL, becomes bigger and more professional, and clubs kind of move away, or there's I guess a disenchantment from certain areas and certain clubs, and that community link that people forget too. And I've heard other people say that you talk about moving, or some people have spoken about clubs. All the clubs should play at 2 stadiums in Sydney, because that's what they do in Melbourne with AFL. But for people that understand AFL, or Melbourne for that matter, everything's so close together that you can get away with it. But Sydney, I think we don't take advantage or harness the fact or appreciate that despite we have this great rugby league city, we have got so many different cities within that and communities where you've got Penrith and you've got Campbelltown and you've got Cronulla and you've got Manly and all these different places. And I think at the time, like you just touched on, about the community link. Now, Penrith were just coming good by then, right? So they came into the comp in 67, and for a long time they were the cellar dwellers out at Old Penrith Park. It wasn't a nice place to play for away teams. I don't think even the Panthers liked playing at the old ground. It's still the same. No, it's still the same spot, but it was a completely different place back then, wasn't it?
Yeah. As the song goes, I think we've got a few club songs, and they play them all after every Penrith win. And one of them, Panther Power, the lyrics in it go, "It took 25 years of blood, sweat, and tears," and that was exactly right. Like, I mean, we're still not fashionable. Like, we could win 3 or 4 premierships in a row, and we're still not going to be one of the cool teams. We're just going to be, Penrith. Like, yeah, but it was that really gritty sort of history that the club had, and that just adds to the character of it all. Yeah.
Oh, I think personally though, that's what makes Penrith great. That's what will make the Panthers the powerhouse in the next 50 years. Is that they can be a super team out in the West, and they don't have to be like the Roosters. They don't have to be the Melbourne Storm. They're the Panthers. And I think they've got that back, and Phil Gould's got a little bit to do with that, and obviously now Cleary's back again as well. But I want to jump forward to the end of the game in 1991, the big grand final, which we will go back to and finish with. But Greg Alexander's, and this is one thing from the grand final that always sticks in my head, the very understated Greg Brandy Alexander, the way he is, he grabs the trophy, and of everything that he can blurt out of his mouth, he says, yes. How much was that just Greg Alexander? But for the community and for people like your mum who didn't even like footy, what did it mean? When Brandy lifted the trophy.
This is a bit of a theme back at the time. It meant that we were on the map. It meant that Penrith existed. In terms of the great wide world that was Sydney at the time. And because Penrith wasn't really, it still battles for it now. It battles for respect within the Sydney basin. It's way out, as far west of Sydney as you can get. And I really sensed that. There was a cartoon in a Daily Telegraph for the Monday morning, I think it was, and I don't know who it was, whether it was Warren or Zanetti or whoever drew it, but it was a skyline, a city skyline, with a giant panther holding up the Winfield Cup, and down the base of the Winfield Cup, it said Penrith, centre of the world, and that's
amazing.
That was basically how everyone felt. Like, yes, we've finally done it, and I think that was what Brandy might have been referring to. There was so much relief in those celebrations that took place. You could see it on all the players' faces, and they probably celebrated a little bit too long, I think.
And look, I get that too, and it's not a grand final, but the 96 game, and you've probably seen me on Twitter talk about this game all the time. Magpies versus Bears, the 50-metre field goal, and then at the end of the game when the crowd runs onto the field and Ray Warren's going, Campbelltown, the Magpies, and that's what it feels like. I get tingles a bit. I got tingles all over right now. I got goosebumps everywhere just thinking about my little corner, and at the time too, because you're told over and over again that Campbelltown's a shithole, you know, and all this other stuff, and, you know, the little wink and all that, and you got to kind of just bite your tongue and put up with it, particularly when you work in the city and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure you've been privy to that kind of thing too about Penrith back in the day. But like, it is. It's amazing to be able to, and it is. At the end of the day, the grand final, the '91 grand final, that, like, you were there in '90, so we'll talk about that now.
Yep.
The 1990 grand final, it doesn't always mean you'll be back again to get another shot at it. And Balmain, the heartbreak that they had for a couple of years in a row, they were meant to win it, apparently. They were meant to win it for a couple of years in a row. They never did. Was there a confidence about the Panthers, if you can remember, was there a confidence that the Panthers could do it again in '91 and get back there?
I think so. I think from the start of the '91 season, the momentum was there. It was as if that was the starting point. Like, we're going into the 1991 season as the team that made the grand final. So it was already not momentum, the status within the competition. You know, Penrith was already in the top two, and all they had to do was just build on what they achieved the year before.
Yep.
But it was still a bloody hard season, '91. It was. I remember it's such a hard year, but that there was massive heartbreak after the '90 loss. I interviewed Royce Simmons, went out to the Panthers Academy in 2018 to interview him. I sat down and had this terrific hour-long interview with him, and I reckon he's still a little bit burnt from that 1990 loss. You know, yeah, you could tell, like, he didn't really like talking about it. And I've never watched the game again. Never. I never will, because of what it represented. There was so much pain from it, and I think it would have been a driving factor in what they achieved in '91. It couldn't not, because it sucked so much, I think. Yeah.
And then '91 comes around, and it's the start of a new era. I love jerseys, mate. And I know you love your retro jerseys too.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the Panthers, they've been the chocolate soldiers, they've been the licorice all sorts. And I reckon, and this is coming from a Magpies fan who loves the Victor black and white jersey, I still think this '91 jersey with the red numbers on the back, when they revealed that jersey as a kid in Penrith, it's almost like going from black and white TV and all of a sudden you're in IMAX watching something in colour. How exciting was it to see this jersey? And I'm going to sound like nerds talking about this, but I can just imagine what it was like going, whoa, that jersey's incredible. The whole strip.
And everyone wanted one. And I remember how cool the players looked in it. Like, Greg Alexander in that new Penrith jersey looked so cool. Like, he looked like a bit of a Panther himself.
Yep.
And there was a great pride in wearing the new strip. I think Royce said in our chat again, it went from the worst selling jersey to the best in a couple of weeks. Yeah, and I thought you'd ask me about the jersey, and it was basically the only time I can think of, aside from those Gold Coast, you know, the 100 versions of the Gold Coast team, the only time I can remember a team changing its colour scheme, and sort of everyone was on board by the time they started winning in '91. It was as if we've got a new jersey, we're winning games, this must be the year. There was all sorts of silly stuff going on like that. But yeah, the red numbers, that left a mark with me too. Like, whenever you see a team wear red numbers, it takes you back to '91. I don't know why that's cool, but it just worked.
Oh, Ben, I love the Penrith jersey this year, and I was shocked because I think only a couple of years ago they brought back the '91 strip with the white with the black hoops, and then after 1 year they took it away and kind of blended in the black. But that's fine. Just bring back the red numbers on the back, and I'll buy a Panthers membership.
if they have red numbers on the back.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just them either. It was another one that really got it right with the Bears with their black numbers.
Yep.
On the red background, and it just looked really cool. They got it right with the jerseys in that era. They nailed it. Like, they nailed the identity. The color schemes were fantastic, and then it's just started to lose it over the next decade, I reckon, to the point where, half the jerseys are half white and there's swirls and skinny little lines on them, and I don't know. Footy jerseys should be footy jerseys, I reckon. Yeah.
Exactly right. We'll get back there one year, and it'll be the perfect season where every team gets it right. But until then, let's quickly talk about Phil Gould. So he's this master young coach. He's already coached a premiership team in '88, Canterbury against Balmain, and then he comes to Penrith, and everything kind of changes overnight. And it's his ability, I guess, to get the best out of players and get into their minds. Does Penrith win the '91 grand final without Phil Gould as coach?
I don't think so, no. We had Ron Willey a few years before and Tim Sheens, and I reckon because Phil Gould wasn't, again, with that respect thing, he wasn't that much older than his playing group, and I think it just worked. I think he had that much footy knowledge that it would have rubbed off on blokes like, young blokes like Freddie and Ben Alexander and Greg Barwick and people like that. That they would have just seen his expertise, and he just got it right. He was such a good coach, Gus Gould. And he didn't have to go to Penrith. They hadn't won anything but when he arrived. So he obviously saw something in that playing group and thought, this team's going somewhere, and I might, jump on board and see what I can do with it. It was a very, very exciting time for Gus, no doubt. Yeah.
The 24th of July, 1991. So we're kind of halfway through 91, so we're jumping back and forward a little bit. But Canberra, it's been reported that they've breached the salary cap to the number of $1.5 million, which is a fair chunk in 91.
Yeah.
And by this time, the biggest one-on-one battle, football-wise, is Panthers versus Raiders. Both teams are sitting on top of the table. They've already played in the 90 grand final. Would that have been something that the Panthers players and Phil Gould would have discussed internally to drive them through the season and say, hey, we've already gotten so close once against these blokes. They're cheating the cap. Would that have been a positive for the Panthers?
Oh, for sure. I don't know. It's interesting. I forgot about the cap drama, but I remember mid-season, I think Canberra thrashed Penrith 20-0 down there at Bruce Stadium. That would have knocked Penrith around a bit, but for sure. Like a team like those Westie teams, they hold grudges. Like look at the most recent West Tigers and Penrith game. Like their rivalry is built on a grudge. Yeah, they would have used it for sure. Absolutely. Like you aren't better than us. You got us last year, but we're gonna get you this year. It would have been a major motivating factor, I reckon. Yeah.
You spoke about Brad Fittler as being your favourite player, and I don't think, and I can assume this, I wouldn't think Greg Alexander's too far away either, mate. So, how important was, I guess, Fittler in the centres? And he was a different body back then. He was still a young fella. He had a huge frame, and then you had Alexander, and then you throw in the combination of Steve Carter, who just always appeared, if you watched him in 91 or 10 years later, he always just looked like a grizzled veteran that could, change a game with if it was a coat hanger to fire his team up, or if you had to run 50 metres to score a try, Scarter could do it, right? So did it all just fall into place? You had the young guns who just finished. A couple of them went on a kangaroo tour in 1990, and then a few veterans plus Phil Gould, and then the backing of a community right behind them. It just all fell into place at the right time, didn't it?
Yeah. And I spoke to Freddie about 5 or 6 years ago, before he came into the Origin coaching scene, and I was lucky. Dad took me and my uncle out to Arana Park to watch. I think it was Ellery Hanley's first game in Australia, and I could be mixing history up here, but the main reason we went was to watch this new kid called Bradley Fittler, who had arrived, and we didn't go anywhere. We didn't go to away games back then because Sydney was a lot bigger place. Took forever to get to certain
down the
places.
Northern Road.
Yeah, Northern Road.
Yep.
We lived in Mount Pleasant, which is called Cranebrook now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we like that game always stuck in my mind. It was pouring down with rain. There was mud on that far hill. It was just mud and water everywhere.
Shithole.
And I asked Freddie about that game, and I asked him like, what was it about that team and him in particular that was behind all that success. And he said it was basically because the players around him just gave the young blokes so much confidence. Like back in that game that I was talking about in '89, you had blokes like Chris Mortimer and Peter Kelly.
Yeah.
Just imagine playing in that team. Like you just feel invincible because if you got into the slightest amount of trouble, whether it be beaten in a tackle or beaten up in a tackle or whatever, just knowing that you've got blokes like, Nobby Clark and Paul Dunn and Mark Geyer and Barry Walker ready to come and monster whoever was going to have a go at you. So, yeah, it was a good combination. And the young blokes really helped the old blokes as well, like with that drive. They, like with every premiership team, they just got it right, and they got it right for a few years. So it was good to see that era play out back in the early 90s. Yeah.
Speaking of the mighty Magpies, in 1991, the Panthers, they go through the first 8 rounds of the season without a loss. Their first loss comes to the Warren Ryan's Magpies, 12-8, and it's you can pick worse teams to lose to because they actually end up in the finals themselves. A draw in round 2 against the Knights. They're a great side as well. They I think they knocked the Magpies out in the semis.
Yep.
Looking at Andrew Ferguson's amazing website, Rugby League Project, who I think we've mentioned in every podcast so far because you have to. So, I don't know what we would do without it.
The bloke needs a paywall on that website. For sure.
Man, I've said to him I've said that to him before. He's asked me, like, we've just been chatting, and I said, mate, just charge people, give them, but they'll have to. They'll make an app, do something. But looking back at the first 8 rounds, to me, at those clubs they beat in those first 8 rounds, it wasn't the toughest draw. And that could have worked against them later in the year. But the big test comes in round 9 against the Manly Seagulls, another formidable team in 91. It's at Brookvale. It's a Sunday afternoon. There's 21,000 fans there. And you talk about great jerseys. Just imagine being on the hill in the sun watching the Dada Panthers against the Pino Seagulls. The Panthers smack Manly 32-8. That's a nice little flex to get the season going after already going undefeated through, or only dropping 1 in 8 rounds. Yeah.
Imagine the confidence that you'd have after that. And a few weeks after that, they played Norths at Penrith. I think it was around 13 or 14, and Penrith won 8-0. It was one of the most brutal games of footy I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Back then, Penrith was a dust bowl through the winter, and it just proved that not only were they one of the best teams cohesion-wise and, balance-wise, but they're also one of the toughest teams in the comp, and they were really ready for anything that was thrown at them. And that Norths team of the era just had some hard bastards in it, and it kind of was almost not about the scoreboard. It was like about the physical battle, and I think that particular physical battle ended up a draw that day because what a game that was. And then that as you say, that first half of the year they didn't slip up too many times, but back then it was so hard. The game was it's tough now, but it's athletically hard. Like back then it was survival hard. Imagine playing in it would have been, and imagine playing in that era on the weekend after you've just worked 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Just a different world, wasn't it? Yeah.
And it's funny you talk about the Bears as well, because I just finished on Sunday morning the latest episode of Top of the Props with Gary Larson, and
yeah.
and he spoke about the '91 Bears, and it's crazy because sliding doors, butterfly effect. Like we could be sitting here today talking about the Bears getting up to win the '91 premiership, and we'll get to the finals and that really tight game that the Panthers and Bears played too. But the Bears that season as well, because we spoke about Manly as well, and obviously Canberra we'll talk about shortly as well. But Larson talks about they got Mario Fennick and Pat Jarvis, and they just already had some real hard nuts, and then they had Florimo and Larson and Fairley and Billy Moore, all these other guys coming through. And you talk about how tough week-to-week rugby league football was then. The Broncos were on the cusp of beginning their great run, but then still you'd have to go up to Lang Park, and even if they weren't going that well, you'd still have to play against the Queensland Maroon side with a sprinkling of Kangaroos. Every team had good rosters, and they had depth in reserve grade, didn't they? It was a great time for footy.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And if you weren't tough, you couldn't play. Like there weren't even blokes like Ricky Walford and Rod Wishart on the wings. They were still tough. They were like, I'm not saying today's players aren't, but yeah, just the way that these guys shaped themselves up for a fight after, as I say, like working 3, 4, 5 days a week. Like it just was such a I can't emphasise how impressed I am at the history of the sport and its ability to. I don't know. It must attract people. Like these blokes don't go into boxing. They go into footy because they must love the team sort of environment of it. Apart from that, there isn't much difference between rugby league and boxing, is there? Like they're similar ilk as far as the athletes go and determination and all that sort of thing. I forget where we were going with this.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
I've actually got something a little bit off topic anyway. Is that what those players of that time working, training, playing, and then going in on the piss for however long they did. They remind me a bit now of brickies and concreters and stuff who get up at 3 or 4 in the morning. They go and work and break their backs. Then they can still go and have a drink and enjoy themselves. I think it's just ingrained in the psyche growing up back then of even before that and the people that came before them that you worked, you played footy, but you never complained about it. You just got on with it because that was the norm.
Yeah, I remember Royce talking about the fact that when you were injured, you just didn't show it. Like you might have severely busted something in your guts or something, or in your chest, a couple of broken ribs or whatever. And the rule was you just played on, you just kept going. And I can't imagine what they're crazy. They're absolutely crazy. And like he wasn't the biggest bloke by any stretch, but that was his real claim to fame. And blokes like him, like he just never went off. No matter what sort of injury you had, broken jaw or busted ribs or whatever, you just kept going. And I know it's all masculine sort of showing off and that kind of thing, but leaving the field injured it wasn't good for your reputation at all.
It's evident by the midway point of the season. The Panthers are going to go very, very deep into the finals. Even though the Panthers made the grand final in 1990, like from the outside looking in at the Panthers, did you believe that other clubs and fans still didn't respect the Panthers, and did that help the Panthers, and did people still underestimate them come finals in 91?
No, not particularly. I thought by then it was they were one of the top teams, and they were well on top towards the end of the season. They won a minor premiership by 6 competition points.
Yeah.
So they were they were there in their brands, as you say, brand spanking jerseys, and the grand finalists from the year before. I think by then they did have that respect. But yeah, I mean, bit of a different story the year before. And thinking back now, like, considering the conversation that you and I have just had, maybe it was right that Penrith didn't have that respect because they hadn't made a grand final for 25 years. So you got to earn it along the way as well, don't you? Yeah.
From round 14, the Panthers lose just one more game for the year, and that's a 14-12 loss in a really, what was at that time, and I guess still is to a certain extent when they get their field back, but a road trip to Caltex, and they go down 14 points to 12. It looks like, going back to Rugby League Project for a minute and looking at the scores, the Panthers, they're going to finish minor premiers. They lose that game in round 20 to the Sharks. But then in the final two games of the season, you put 41 on the Tigers and 42 on East. So if Panthers are ever going to win the premiership, it's 91. After looking where they're placed and ready to go for the finals.
Yeah. I remember. I don't remember those results specifically, but I remember that time of year when they were starting to really fire up, and there was a lot of emotion attached to the club as well. Like, because Royce had only played about 8 or 9 games, and he was literally on his last legs. He was injured for most of it, and spent a bit of it a lot of it in reserve grade, and he wasn't actually even supposed to take part in any of what happened. And I think that Balmain game was the ground record at the time, because it was like people packing the ground to watch Royce Simmons play in reserve grade to farewell Penrith Park. It was, and then everything that happened. But yeah, Penrith, in August, September gets really long. The late winter sunsets, and I remember it back then. Like they were just on fire. They were steeled. They finished the season. They just had to win one more game to get into the grand final. And as I said before, like that comes from the momentum from the previous year. Like that, they'd already 3/4 filled the jug up. They only had to make sure that it was topped up throughout the whole 91 season, and they were going to be okay. They were going to make it again. But yeah, it was really starting to sink in that they're going to get another shot at that stage. Yeah.
I can kind of, speaking of time machines, I can sit there and kind of understand what it was like in 91. A mate of mine, Daniel, who's a Panthers fan, couldn't get on with the West Tigers merger, so he changed to the Panthers from the Magpies at the end of 99. But he started dragging me along in 2003. I reckon I travelled across, and we probably went to about 6 or 7 Panthers games in 2003. Yeah. And it didn't matter who they played. Like, I just remember Sunday afternoons, there was one against the Roosters, another one against the Warriors, who were very good. And if you got there late, and the entryway at the northern end, at the back of the hill, where you finally get in, and you're basically trying to peer over the top of people's shoulders without falling down the back of the hill. And the running joke we have is, when the Panthers are going good, no red seats. When they're struggling, red seats. Because, the fans don't show up, and, that's fair enough. But it would have been the same deal back then. Like you said, Sunday afternoon footy, Saturday afternoon football, the sun coming down, the players just smashing teams as well. I don't have this in front of me. How did President's Cup and Reserve Grade go that year for Panthers?
I don't know. I don't have a clue.
They probably smashed everyone too. Let's just say that.
Yeah, they've always had strong lower grade teams. Penrith, always. Yeah, it's just we've never been able to. Oh, not never, but yeah, like continuing the lineage and making sure we keep the right players. There's always something that Penrith has struggled with up until the last couple of years. So seem to have it right now, but yeah, it took the absolute reformation of the club and the building of a multi-million-dollar academy to get it right. But yeah, and that's the other thing about Penrith too. It's such a ginormous league nursery. Just 10 or 15,000 junior players every weekend playing footy.
Yeah.
You're not going to fool yourself into thinking they all want to play for Penrith one day, but they're in the system.
Yep.
So yeah, they're kind of on the front foot from the outset. Yeah.
So let's talk about acts of God. So I spoke with Larson on Sunday on Top of the Props about how the Bears would have been safe and would have been in the NRL. They'd still be here today if Central Coast Stadium was built on time, except for the monsoonal rains, which just terrorised Gosford and Sydney in '99, and basically put the completion of the stadium back to the point where it wasn't finished, and the Bears had to merge with Manly, and we all know the story there. Let's talk about another act of God. Semi-final, Bears versus Panthers. Darryl Halligan, 1 from 5. Panthers win 16-14.
Yeah,
How did that
saw
happen?
that. I saw that on Vossi's The Fan the other night.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, like wow. Like no, he didn't highlight that in particular, but he said it like as a fact of the game. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, that's why he's playing first grade, isn't he, Darryl Halligan, to kick goals? That's why he's there.
That didn't look like it then, but no. But there you go.
It was a great game of football, though. The Panthers hold on 16-14, and you guys are through to the grand final.
Yeah.
But like talk about the Panthers Bears thing. Like if it goes the other way and Halligan kicks his goals, the Panthers still hypothetically they still could go on and win the grand final. They'll just play Canberra a week earlier than what they're supposed to. Then we get a Panthers Bears grand final.
Yeah.
But look, you make your own luck in the game, don't you? So you get through. And I asked Gary Larson the same question, and you would have loved this. I'm sure you did the same thing. But we were talking about early 90s, how many great semi-finals we got at the SFS, how much great weather we got. And there was nothing better than the SFS in September watching a final. And the crowds then were amazing. Like we're talking 30,000 plus at most semis.
Yeah, it still seems to this day. Oh, not now because they knocked it down, but there was kind of like a haunting element to the SFS back then, wasn't there? Like when the teams met, particularly in the prelim finals or the major semis as they were called back then, like it was just, there was, whether it was sunny and 35 degrees, mid-September or you got a setting like that, the Canterbury Balmain grand final in '88. The stadium just seemed to be a terrific sort of haunting sort of backdrop to what was happening, and it always ensured that something dramatic was going to happen. I loved that ground. I loved it.
Oh, just to the top of my head right now, the semi Parramatta and the Bulldogs and all the Bulldogs fans. They're like thousands of them are walking back down to Central Station. And they're getting word, they're probably listening to, 2UE with Hadley or whatever, or ABC, and they all turn around and start running back to the ground. Like 97 grand final, like you're right.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, the place just was like a terrific stage for drama, and it was weird because it was getting late in the year. It did start to, it does start to warm up around about that time, but then they can throw up the most miserable sort of overcast, cloudy day, and you just add a dramatic game of footy in with it. And there's just there was something special about semi-finals at the SFS. It was just like it was. I'm not a gamer by any stretch, but it was like that was the next stage in the game, and only the great teams got to play that day. And it's goosebump stuff, as you said. Yeah.
Brandy actually said or wrote for Inside Sport magazine, which you had a lot to do with for many years. He says, I think sometimes too we might have underestimated or understood ourselves in the years prior to 91. I think 4 of us going away on a Kangaroos tour helped a lot in terms of confidence as a side. I think that rubbed off on the team, and that showed right through the regular season. Being Penrith captain added responsibility to my game, and Mark Geyer, Cartwright and Fittler, by the time everyone came back, they were pretty confident in their own abilities, and we had a pretty good team around us as well. How much going into jumping into half-time in the 91 grand final, the Raiders are up 12-6. So you're challenging the championship team, the Hulk Hogan of that era, the team. How much of what Phil Gould had to say at half time, and how much was it about the individual players and what they could bring to the second half to get them up and come back out the second half and do what they did?
Oh, yeah, I still don't know what he said, but it must have been good because you'd think by then, by halftime down 12-6, second grand final in a row, you'd think that every player would have the confidence in themselves to know that, that this team can go on with it. I mean, Penrith had to have been hungrier than Canberra. They had to have been. And it was such a dramatic second half that none of them obviously knew what laid in store, and it kind of did feel, as a spectator, it did feel that here we go again. They're going to get us again, these bastards. It's sport's weird, isn't it?
And it gets weirder too because Canberra don't score again, but in the second half, a couple of points. Alexander misses a penalty goal. Paul Smith dives over for a try, but it's disallowed by the touch judge because of foul play in the background. And because of that, Big Mark Guy comes across and blows up, and he gets sent for 10 in the bin.
Oh, God, I've never seen anyone so angry at being sin-binned ever. He was furious. It's like, you better watch yourself, mate. Like, you're gonna get yourself sent off here. And I remember Graham Hughes, his comment was, "This is the most dramatic moment of the 1991 season." And I can't remember when it was. It was about 15 minutes into the second half, wasn't it, or something? It was
close, yeah.
That was, he was furious then, and then he must have calmed down in the break because he had a great last quarter of the game for sure. Yeah.
And everyone talks about it, and we've done it ourselves. We talk about Royce and Alexander and Fittler, but if it's not for Brad Izzard, you don't get back to 12-all.
Oh, Brad Izzard, he was, and he could have scored again because
Daly got him, I think.
Oh, well, the one on the line.
Yeah.
That was Meninga. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, there you go. Yep.
Yeah. He was basically, he had his whole body over the line. He was about 5 metres to the right of the goalpost. And Izzard was over. His whole body was over the try line. And Meninga just grabs him and just throws him back. That bloke was so strong, Mal Meninga. Yeah.
Izzard wasn't a small boy.
Yeah. Well, exactly. He was like a muscly little wombat. And but for sure, totally agree. Like, his is the performance that not enough people talk about. After a while, everyone's going to be talking about it as if it's the moment that nobody talks about. So it's on its way. It's a slow burn. Izzard in the grand final, but what a reliable player that bloke was. Yeah, just never had a soft game. You always got exactly the same. Just a hard performance in attack and defence. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, every premiership team needs a Brad Izzard. Seven to go. Alexander kicks the field goal, and you go up 13-12.
Yeah.
There's a bit of destiny about this all now, and the Panthers, they turn the screws. So you're playing the game at the right end of the field as well, and then we get the famous short dropout. Royce gets his second try. His first try, what I think was the better try because he ran right over the top of Glenn Lazarus. Everyone forgets that.
Lazo had an injury though.
Yeah, okay.
When I talked to Royce, he really took the romance out of that moment for me.
Well, you just took the romance out of me as well.
He said, Lazo had a broken sternum or something like that. I thought, good on you. Like that was, because when you watch his first try, you think, that goes against physics.
Yeah.
Like a 3 foot tall bloke pushing over a 7.5 foot tall bloke. I know that's an exaggeration on both sides, but you got to, you sort of wondered, holy crap, like how strong is Roy Simmons? But yeah, that try, Mark Geyer, like, I can't remember who made the dropout. Was it Scotty Gale?
I think so.
MG says that he initially went and stood right up close to the line. He said he knew what was going to happen, but his tactic was he was waiting for Laurie Daly to get the ball, and he was just going to nail Laurie Daly, and the Panthers were going to keep them down for that set of 6 and really pin them near the goalpost, and the ball just like lands in his hands, and oh God, like that moment must just be so special to that bloke, especially after he got sin bin about.
That's what I was going to say.
20 minutes before, yeah.
Yeah, like how important it was just for MG's psyche and the rest of his career, and how successful he's been post-career as well. Just for himself. Like, you can imagine Mark Geyer, who wears his heart on his sleeve, if he didn't get that moment at the end of the game, and all he was known for in the grand final was abusing the ref and getting 10 in the bin, he wouldn't have felt like he contributed to the team.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because it did overshadow everything. Like if you watch the game back, he's so angry throughout the whole game. And he only ever took one line, and that was basically straight up the middle, like, straight up the corridor of where the ball is kicked off in the centre of the field. He just used to run straight up the guts. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Like, it's good that he was involved in such a historic and exciting moment. Yeah. And
to top it all off, if you don't mind, Greg Alexander belts the conversion to the sideline over the black dot. That's the game, 1912. At the time, like I know you said that you and the family got out of Penrith, went down to Mossy, moved out of the West. But at that time, like, yes, Penrith as a town had been there for years, but it was a young, it was also a young city too, in the fact that I know for a fact that my uncle and auntie moved out to Rooty Hill around the same time, built a house. There's a lot of young families kind of coming through in the early 90s. And it was a kind of age of innocence for the team as well, because it was just before the tragic passing of Ben Alexander. So when you look at it, looking back about what you know's about to come around the corner, and which kind of screwed the Panthers for the whole decade, in the fact that the players, and particularly Gus and MG and Brandy, just couldn't deal with what happened. But at that time, 91. Knowing what happened after it was a kind of age of innocence for the Panthers, wasn't it?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, exactly. And it was sort of like it was a giant 21st, and the hangover just hit hard, something shocking, and it was as if the area got penalised because something good finally happened, like football wise. I know that's complete nonsense, but yeah, it's like you've had your 2 or 3 years of good footy. Now back you go down the bottom, and you're right. Like, the next good period where you had was around. I think in the year 2000. I think was the first time they made the playoffs after that. Yeah. I think apart from Super League, they finished 5th in 97. But yeah, the aftermath of that grand final was just it took so much out of the club, and they were basically trying to rebuild it after Super League came along. It was a really struggling time for the club. Yeah.
Well, I've got one more question for you tonight, James. So Brad Clyde gets the Clive Churchill Medal. If you were giving the award, which Panther deserved the Clive Churchill Medal in 1991?
Oh, I agree with what you said before. Like, Steve Carter, he was terrific that day. I'll never forget. Like, he just didn't stop trying. Not a fashionable player by any stretch, but just the spirit that he showed that day. And Royce as well. Like, Royce was just an absolute mess after the game. Like, take the 2 tries out of it, he was so composed. He was a real calming influence over that whole team. It was you're talking about Gould before. It was Gould's decision, obviously, to put Royce into the side in the dying stages of the year, and I think he addressed the playing group. It might have even been the Balmain game, and he said Royce is back into the side, and he's going to stay in for the rest of the campaign, however far we go. That was another absolute gold tactic, because it just, how can you lose for Royce in his last year? Like there isn't any other option really, and they certainly didn't let him down, but he didn't let them down as like either. He did play as if it was his last game, and it's just a really good performance by old Royce. It was terrific.
I still remember Royce Simmons when he was assistant coach under Sheensy at West Tigers. After a game at Campbelltown one night, and we were in West Leagues in the pokey area, and Royce, he walks past, and I said, "Hey Royce, where's that beer?" And he said, "Get fucked." I reckon he regrets saying that after the grand final, because he would cop that from everyone all the time.
Yeah. I asked him about that too. He said, I said, "Have you had a beer with everyone yet, Royce?" He goes, "Yeah, I reckon I have."
Yeah,
there's some cheeky bastards out there who've come and tried to have a second one as well over the years. But yeah, that was like, you wish that every grand final had a quote, and that was it. It was so Penrith, it was so rugby league, and apparently he hasn't changed much, Royce. Like he's lost it. He's in good shape. He's really good shape for somebody who was such a rugged player back in the day. But yeah, that persona that he has just hasn't changed one bit. Like, and everyone loves him for it. I think he works in the corporate side, golf days out and stuff like that. And
you'd love that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what like going off topic a little bit. That's what I reckon that clubs should do more with. Like, they should be getting their legends, because a lot of them are banged up, and not everyone has super the way that we do now. But a lot of these guys are just banged up old men who are sitting there with injuries, thinking that they've been forgotten. Imagine how cool it would be to have them around the club more, and saying good day to fans and hanging out, with corporate sponsors on golf days. And I think more should be done with those former players, particularly from the 70s and 80s, because people still love them. Like their history, they're part of the fabric of their clubs, and it's good to see that Royce has like never left the Panthers fold even after all those years, and it just feels right that he's still involved in it all. Yeah, that's what I really like about that situation. Yeah.
It sounds like right now in 2020, on the 31st of August, on the cusp of the finals, the Panthers are doing everything right, and they're finally where they're supposed to be. So I wish you nothing but luck for the finals, my man. It should be very interesting. They've won 1,000 straight. What could go wrong?
Exactly. We'll go up to Brisbane, and Cleary will trip over the sideline or something. No, there's a lot of it feels. I know it's a tired old line, but it feels a lot like that 2003 season. It's just lots of young juniors. They got no fear, and people are using momentum. The word momentum. I think it's a lot more than that. I think they're just a really good footy team, and they're going to keep playing like that. But as you say, it's taken long enough to get to this stage. We've lost a lot of players, or let go of a lot of players, particularly over the last year or two, where you think you're letting him go, like you're letting Zelezniak go, like you're letting Regan Campbell-Gillard go, and Wanga Blake and Maloney, like a year out from his contract, expiring, and so somebody at Penrith knows what they're doing. They're hanging on to the right people, and that's what gives you the confidence that they're going to be good for a while yet. So, yeah, all good.
James, I truly appreciate your time today, mate, and it's great looking back on a mighty 90-91 season for the Panthers. Thanks again, and we'll get you back sometime very soon to talk about 2003 as well.
Excellent, Curtis. It's been really fun. Thanks so much.